4 pages.
And go.
Voila, we are live. I believe.
Sure are.
You want to put it on the big screen there?
I am. But you can go ahead and start.
Good afternoon, everybody. July 16th, 2024. This is the Lions IGA Task Force meeting, and we're kicking off. We'll start with our self-conducted roll call. So I'm Douglas Matthews.
Martin Suslaw,
Charlie Stevenson.
Jen Wingard.
David Hamrick, Sonny Smith.
Wendy Miller. Julie Jacobs.
Andrew Bowen.
Candy Kaplan.
Full house and a few spectators. Thank you. Next, we will approve the agenda, which is short but not easy. So basically, I want to start with just some opening discussions about process and get some feedback and ideas. A few different thoughts have come together over the last week with amongst a few of the folks here. So we'll talk through that. And then today's really about diving into the document itself and seeing where we have agreement and where we don't and how we're going to proceed on that. And then assuming we finish that up, we can kind of start diving into next week's topic, which is a little more about properties, but that we may or may not get to that section. Any questions, comments, thoughts, or edits to the agenda? Simon, do we have a motion?
Approved.
Second.
All in favor? Everybody? Excellent. That was unanimous. The minutes from last meeting, everybody's had a chance to look at those, or does anybody have any comments, questions, or edits, additions, corrections? Nothing? I thought they were good. I thought we covered a lot and captured a lot. So if you haven't read through them, it's worth reading through them. Do we have a motion on that then? Motion approved, Martin. Second, all in favor? Unanimous. Excellent. Let me start with a couple of opening comments and then we'll open it up to the team. I scheduled about 15 minutes or so for us to talk about the process a little bit. A couple of things I did clarify because the question came up last week about how does Jen's role as an alternate work. Anytime that somebody is missing, she is the filler for that person. Anytime somebody can't or chooses not to vote, if we have a motion, if they choose not to vote, then Jen votes in their place. So that's kind of how we understand the rules to be. I just wanted to kind of put that out there because that was a question that came up after last week's meeting. Now we know. So you are an alternate for everybody, not just a permanent displacement of anybody.
If we're gonna miss something, do we need to prize her where we stand on it?
She's, I think, my feeling, she's been participating actively on everything. She has her own voice. And I think when we get into the process, she's not necessarily representing somebody. She's just filling in a missing member.
Yeah, she's not a proxy.
She's not a proxy. Yeah.
That's what.
Yeah.
And also, Doug, I don't know if you talked to the mayor. She was going to talk to you about abstaining.
I did. Yeah, I did. So I'll mention that as well. So the topic came up last week about abstaining on a vote. And basically, unless there's a really direct conflict, specifically like a financial interest type of conflict, we're all required to vote and really not abstain. If you don't understand which side you're on, err on the side of being conservative and vote against it. Or ask for more questions or engage in more dialogue. I think that should clear things up there, and we'll cross that bridge if we get to it going forward, which is a perfect segue into the process. So I think we've all had a lot of different thoughts. I've heard from, I think, everybody at the table at one point or another over the last 2 weeks. And heavens know, I put a lot of thought into how do we find an exit ramp for this group over the course of the next 3 weeks to have something meaningful. And Julie and I had a really great workshop, I guess, discussion earlier this week. And really, I think we came up with some really good ideas, and we kind of want to put them forward. So if I don't say these correctly, let me know. But basically, we've established very clearly, just like the town itself, that this is a absolutely perfect cross section of the town. I don't think the board could have done any better of picking individuals from different sides of the town, from different backgrounds, different experiences, and therefore different viewpoints. So that's the good news. It makes it hard for us to come to a consensus on some things, which is to be expected. It's hard for the town to come to some consensus on things. But one of the ideas that came forward when Julie and I were talking through issues, and I think that a great example is the discussion last week where we did have the vote, and because we had one person abstain, the vote died. It wasn't passed, it wasn't rejected, it just died. And I think that was a clear topic that this group is divided. And so I don't think we should be putting forward one single recommendation that is a slight majority vote. So even if that would have won by 4-3, one way or the other, I don't think that represents us as a group. If it was 6-1, we could have a discussion about it. But I think if we have something that is so close, then we need to acknowledge that. And that has to be part of our recommendation. And so what we're thinking about in a case like that, so when we talk about the map, this is a great example. Should everything stay on there, or should there be some process that the board uses to determine what's on there? Those are sort of the two debates, and it's really easy to make an argument, I think, especially as we sort of sat together and sort of challenged each other's thinking on it. It's really easy to make a very clear argument on both sides of that equation. And so when we put forward our recommendations, if we have a topic like that, a big one that we can't solve, then what we should put forward is here's the dilemma. Here are the two choices that we came up with as a group. Here's why we think this one is logical. Here's why we think this one is logical. And we give that to the board to sort out. And they're going to have that same debate. But at the end of the day, they're tasked with solving that issue. We're tasked with making recommendations to them about solving the issue. Does that make sense so far? Anybody have thoughts or questions on that premise?
I just wondered if you should be more specific exactly about what the vote was on. I was the one who abstained, so that we're all on the same page of it.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that came out. Martin and I talked about that. Is the reason he abstained was not so much that he didn't want to vote, but it was a little bit unclear what the implications were. And I think that's, shame on us for forcing it. We should have said, well, let's take a step back and either try to clarify it or not be voting on it. So I think that was a good one.
Can you clarify what the vote was on?
Yeah,
for the people
that's-
on
For the people on the,
That's what I'm asking.
I'm sorry.
Last week?
Yeah, so the vote last week was, I can't remember the exact resolution, although it's probably in the minutes, was should we keep all the properties that are on the IGA map on the IGA map or not? So it was either a yes, all of them, or no, not all of them. But it wasn't specifically on it. The vote was 3-3 with one abstain. So in that case, it dies. Again, it's not approved, it's not beaten, but it dies.
So just going back to the two camps or schools of thought, I agree that providing, hey, here's one, which is, one school of thought and the other, and board of trustees recommend, assess and determine what makes the most sense for the board of trustees. But I also think there probably is some kind of common thread that we can all agree. And so I feel like if we were to assess what those commonalities and those agreements and consensuses are that we do share, I think sharing that as, hey, unified or unanimously, we all agree on these things. And then there's some things we disagree on, and here's what we say we recommend. Option 1 or whatever, option 2, pros and cons, et cetera. So
Right.
I feel like I agree with you.
Yeah.
And let's present what we do agree on. Because I think that's going to be really powerful for them to see, oh, wow, if this is truly a representation, embodiment of the community in a microcosm, then here's the very obvious things that everybody agrees on.
Right.
So we should take that into consideration.
And there's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot.
There's a lot we agree on.
Yeah.
David, did you have a comment?
I was just gonna add, I agree with what Charlie's saying. I think, just from a board perspective,
Yeah.
I mean, what I saw last week was one extreme or the other, and I think the answer is somewhere in the middle. Maybe people are hung up on one or two properties. Let's get that out. And
Right.
so, anyway, I would like to hear more of the detail versus all or none.
Yes, right. And I think that's where we're heading. And that certainly is, we sat and kind of talked about differences of perspectives. That's really where we came down is we're not going to be able to decide it. We're not going to be able to make that on a couple of items. And so as just an example, and this was, I know this was sent out, but I'm gonna just share my screen if I can figure out how to do this.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, and what I would just, one thing I want to add is like, it's summertime, we all want to be having fun. Like, we want this to be an easy process. It's definitely had some conflict and some, disagreement. That's totally cool. We're getting there. Like, it would be, I think, really fun to try and find what those consensus points are amongst this group. And I think that the community would love to see that we're finding consensus points. I think it'll be more interesting. And so one suggestion is, what if one of us, maybe it's the person who's note taking or somebody else who has no additional responsibility, just looks for those consensus points as we go on and write them down really quick when you see, oh, there's a consensus point shared between those two or generally. So that way we can have a running list of what those things are. And I think it'll be like a good win. And we can announce, hey, I found a consensus point amongst us. And then cool, add it to the overall recommendation. So that there's some intentionality brought to identifying those things, recording them, and then eventually sharing them.
Perfect. And so what I put on the screen, and this is really, really rough. I mean, it was midnight, just after the board was finishing, after I finished watching them, I was working on this last night. But this is an example of how we might do it. Now, this is not thought out and the wording's not right. But so as we start to look at recommendations, so this first one, the map is the example from last week, right? And so I think we basically say, we did establish that there's two schools of thought on the map. Option one is to keep all options open and let the annexation process take care of it. And there's a lot of nuance in that needs to be crafted and written to explain the logic behind that approach. The other approach is use some reasonable standard for the Board of Trustees to make a determination about properties on the map before it goes on. And there's logic and reason behind why that recommendation would be made. But that's sort of how I would like to propose, or I'd like to put that out in front of the group. When we have something that's really divisive, rather than us sitting here and debating about it for an hour and a half and not getting anything done, does it make sense to start to kind of capture a point like that? I don't think there's going to be too many of them, but the map is a big one. Does that feel right? Or does anybody have anything they'd like to share or say on that? And Julie, did
No,
I capture what we talked about?
I think that's a good example, right? I mean, those are both viable options. We looked at and we kind of distilled it down to what's in parentheses there. It's really about when do we consider the parcels? Is it now when we're putting the IGA together, or when an application is actually submitted? I mean, that really distills a whole bunch of this conversation into something a little more granular and actually definable, and we can outline what we think each of those, and I think, to your point, yes, I mean, I'd love to start with all the stuff we agree on and hopefully only have a few pieces like this that we have to break down. But I think there are going to be some conflicts that are not realistic to resolve. And I think the approach for those is, like Doug said, putting forth something that 4 of us agree on and 3 of us hate doesn't feel as real or useful as saying we have a real division here and 2 valid points, and here they both are. But hopefully most of the things will be a little more in concert, and then every now and then we throw out a few things. But I like this because I came up with it. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a way to try to make sure all the voices are heard. If we just do a majority thing, there's going to be voices that are not heard that should be. And so that was trying to thread a really little tiny needle here.
Wendy, you've been through a lot of these debates through the years. Does this feel like, given the time frame that we have to work on, does this feel like a reasonable approach, or do you have any
I mean,
experience?
it's a
thoughts?
reasonable approach, I think, but I'm a little uncomfortable with the fact that when the whole point of voting is to see what the majority is.
Mhm.
So I think that it's pertinent to put in that, you know, the majority voted this. However, there's still some people that feel this way,
Yes.
this strongly about it.
Yeah.
I don't,
So totally, what I sort of envision us doing, especially today as we get into the document, is a lot of these things are going to come up. And I think first, let's capture them. What are those two schools of thought? Let's not try to pick them apart, but let's capture them. Once we start to craft the wording around it, then I think towards the end of our journey, then I think to Wendy's point is really valid. We should go back through and go, okay, now that we've learned everything we learned, do we still feel that these are two views? Who votes for the first one? Who votes for the second? And if it turns out to be that there's only one person voting for one of them, I think that's worth, to your point, Wendy, I think that's worth noting, right? If it's split, then at least we go, okay, we know
Here's
where
what
we
the
stand.
majority said,
Right.
but it was a slimmer majority than 6.
right.
Right. How can we make this?
I 100% agree with that approach, and I would add to it that maybe we wait until like all of these are fleshed out and then do a votathon or a votorama, you know, at the end. We're not calling
Right.
it, but a
Yeah.
votorama. And just sit through it. And that way, if we've gotten to the end point and we are now like, okay, these are the issues, and it feels like they're well thought out. And also votes midpoint, midstream seem divisive.
Mhm.
You know, and not fully thought out like we saw in this last meeting. So if we can wait until everybody feels like they're totally educated on the topic, then we can have that vote, and that's a really valuable data point to have.
Wendy?
I'm
Sorry,
just
Cindy.
lost. Of all the reading I've done in a week, I don't remember seeing this before, and I'm at the side of the screen, so I don't know what option A and B are, except for the part in caps.
They're just sort of placeholders,
Okay, then
with the
let's hold
idea.
the place, and I won't know anything about
No,
No,
this
no,
isn't-
no.
this
It's
isn't
an
about-
example of
no.
a process.
We're not talking about the content at all, we're talking about the process.
No, I know
only.
you're not talking about
So-
content, but I'm behind on the new process.
That's what we're
talked
trying to
about this
talk about right now,
before.
is
Yeah,
that-
I've been listening, I just don't know the basic, what you want to do, A or B.
Well, so
Those
here's,
words are not relevant, it's the process, like if
Okay,
we,
if
if
it's not
it's,
relevant,
if
I
we.
won't look.
No, I mean, no, the idea being if we have an issue, like, for example, the map, what should be on the map? That we have a very close disagreement on, 3 to 4, that we wanna put both of we wanna let the board know. 4 people said this is what we should do and why.
And is that what you mean by keep the options open and wide? I'm
well,
just trying to figure out
yes,
what
I'm
hole
just
to
make,
plug it
I
in.
was just making up wording, so
Yeah, you're getting
basically,
caught on these words are
yeah,
not, we're
and I
not actually.
apologize, I get what
Then
you're,
take it off, please, because I can't look at what I'm being told to look at.
okay,
And
fair
then
enough.
being told something it isn't what it says.
no,
Can I
I'm
attempt to
just,
summarize? Can I attempt to summarize?
please.
Can I just attempt to summarize? Okay.
Sure, please.
Okay, all right. So what we're talking about is the process with which the task force moves forward, like a process for us. Okay, so say there's a issue number 1. I'm not even going to say what it is. Issue number 1, and we all agree that there's 3 different things that the group is expressing. There's recommendation A for option number 1, a recommendation B, and a recommendation C. And maybe that's all of us share these different things. We just capture it, right? We capture that in a place on a document, and then continue moving through. And maybe another issue comes up. Issue number 2
So
comes
you're
up.
listing all the options for each of the
The possible,
discussions.
right? The main themes, right, that come up. So the main themes that we've
Just
had
the
are
contested ones.
like, you
Just the
know,
contested.
just the contested ones. So then after we've built this document over the course of the next maybe 2 or 3 meetings like this one, and everybody kind of is very familiar with that set of contested topics and the 1 to 3, the 3 options, let's say, for each of them, then we all come back together and sort of with understanding it all, we then sort of vote on each of those contested topics. So that's sort of the overall process that we've used to just get on the same page and or recognize where there is dissent or disagreement, and then record what those majorities and minorities are. So that will help us to then craft the ultimate recommendations we make to the board of
Okay,
trustees.
thanks. I missed the
Yeah.
sub meeting, so I
No
didn't know
worries.
how this was working.
Yeah,
I
it's
was doing
moving
it all
fast.
homework.
Yeah,
Does
and
that make sense though?
I'm
Is that
a
all right?
visual person, so I thought if I put it on a piece of paper and put it up on the screen, but it was, the question last week was on the map. Should we keep all the properties on the map or not? And we obviously didn't agree on that. So we were using that as an example in sort of the argument for keeping them all is to keep the options open. Why hamstring ourselves? I tried to capture a few words. It's not even full sentences.
Doug, somebody, say something real quick.
Yes, please.
You know, the thought of that, what you just said, whether we should keep the properties on the map or not. You know, that thought also changes with the week.
It does.
And it could change even in 2 weeks because of the thought, the week of how it goes.
Yeah.
This past week, I spent time where I drove back into all the properties. I drove back where I had an opportunity to talk to residents who lived near and around those properties, one-on-one, because they were walking their pets or they were out hiking or walking near those properties. And I asked people when I got near those properties, do you live here? Are you around here? And of course, a lot of people recognized me. They knew who I was. They didn't know I was on the IGA task force, but they knew I lived, who I am, who I was, who I am. And so I didn't actually talk about me being on the task force, but I just wanted to get an idea of how they felt about the zoning and how they felt about what was going on and how they felt about road mitigation or, just in general. And so it made me think about what we were just talking about. These things change. And week to week, we can change, and week to week, our decisions and our ideas might change. Like with Victoria, when she mentioned last week or 2 weeks ago, if some of these properties should stay on the list because we don't know what's going to happen 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And sometimes I want to refer to George Orwell. When I was in junior high school and I read those books, 1984 and Animal Farm, there was no way I wanted to believe that we were going to have cameras everywhere and have to have IDs or having things, because things change. And there's a song, everything must change, that Quincy Jones did. And you think about it, everything must change. Seasons change, all things change. What goes up must come down. And so when we think about things in place, and is that property viable or how are we going to look at it down the line? Things do change. And so putting a property on the map, we don't know economically if some property developer is going to have enough money to make those changes, to help those changes come into place. So we don't know. So that's how we look at this picture.
Well, I understand things change economically, but I feel that topography, the fire, the wildlife corridor, really, if it changes for fire, it's getting worse with climate change. It's not going to improve. I agree that economically things change. I don't know if I think that the actual physical parameters are likely to be better.
When you drive back around,
Guys,
drive
we're
back
getting
up
into
like I did.
We're going down
Yeah.
rabbit holes again.
Yeah.
Sorry, we need to really
Yeah.
stay focused here. I appreciate everything you guys are saying, but we're going down this map rabbit hole that has hamstrung us for the last several
But
minutes.
I do think one thing he said that makes really good sense
Yeah.
and speaks to your idea about voting at the end is we
Yeah.
don't know for sure what our position is going to be on the map until we have
Until
more
we get
information. So let's not vote today. Let's vote after we've talked about this more and kind of at the end of the process. So I
And
think
it
that,
doesn't mean we're not putting forth both solutions.
And maybe there actually is one solution that we can all put forth that we agree on, which is not map related and more process related for the Board of Trustees, which is, guys, I don't want to even get into it, but
Well,
like.
don't tell me I'm
Yeah.
going down a rabbit hole. I mean, what I'm
Well,
trying to tell you is, what I'm trying to
You are.
explain and say,
I hear what you're saying.
did you hear what I'm
I do
saying?
absolutely hear what you're saying. And I want to make sure that we do consider that, like, opinions will change between now and the end, which could affect the way we vote on one of those three options.
Right.
Right?
I mean,
Yeah.
if you had done what I've done
Yeah.
and taken time out to go back a second and third time to look at these properties again and go
Maybe I
back
have,
around.
maybe I have.
Oh, maybe you
Okay,
have.
Yeah.
so
So,
let's move on.
Just,
Okay, well, let's go.
So, let's segue to the document itself, because that's the topic of the day. What I'm trying to get to is that there's a lot of things we agree on. There's a few things we don't. We're not gonna solve every problem, right? So, but what we're gonna do is identify the things that we know, the things that we agree on, to Charles's point, and we're gonna capture those. And then we'll create a list of things, recommendations, as we get into the document itself. So let's segue into that and see what kind of train wreck that is. But let's look at that. As we get into the document, I think there's something that Julie and I definitely agreed on, and I think I've heard it from some of the rest of the folks, is that the document must be crystal clear. Words matter. What's in the content is clear. If there are things that are important that we think sort of guiding principles, but they're not actionable, the recommendation I was following on this, or maybe we should try to follow on this, is let's not throw that wording out. Let's use that as a recommendation for the board to consider, but it's not necessarily a statement that ends up in the document itself. So there's really three things we're trying to get to. General recommendations for process and considerations to the board. There's specific recommendations on the IGA document itself, and potentially specific or multiple recommendations on the map itself. It's really those three big buckets that we're trying to get to at this point. Does that seem reasonable to everybody? With that, let's try, and I mentioned this to somebody earlier today and they laughed at me. Let's see how we do with editing a document with 8 different voices.
well, I don't know if that's, why can't we just start with like, what are the overall things that we agree on, so we don't have to jump into the specifics of it? Like,
Okay,
you know,
well,
I think like
because
that
we
has
have
not been a conversation we have yet had.
because we
Yeah.
have to talk about the document, and that's what's on the agenda today.
Okay?
Well,
But it's what's on the agenda.
You asked me to support finding consensus
I am.
in the group, and like, if we jump right into editing the document, Doug, well, you just literally said, you basically said this is almost impossible. You called it a train wreck, et cetera, et cetera.
How do you want to proceed?
Why don't we, the homework was
I
to,
retyped a combination of both of those documents.
Yeah.
It was a real good time. But I did my homework.
Yeah.
Julie did it. I think Doug did it.
we all,
It isn't as if we haven't been through the document really closely now.
Okay.
And I mean, if you have yours in front of you that you redid, can we not just see where the commonalities are and what we?
Because there's a
put in the
lot of
document?
commonalities.
well then, yeah, so why don't we find those? Like, I read through everybody's, that's my point I'm trying to make right here. And
Start
yes,
with the
I
areas
did
of
do the
agreement
homework,
and then dig
and
into
clearly,
areas
like,
of
if people, we all read each other's, then we know what those are. It's not that I don't have an idea of what that consensus is, but does anybody have an idea of what that consensus is? Because I think like, I've talked enough to my neighbors and they've told me enough, like, I need to represent a couple of critical things.
Okay,
If I
well,
don't
let's
say
start with
that-
those. What are the critical things? Let's start with you.
Okay. The critical thing that I'm hearing and that I really strongly feel is that what makes Lyons really special that should be preserved, the reason we all probably live here is because the ecology is something special. And the ecology is preserved by really careful and intentional growth and or leaving things on the periphery kind of alone, depending upon what it is, and by preserving rural land that doesn't disrupt our ecology. I would say that is what I've heard time and again. That's what I feel like that should be a major, and that's also represented in the Lyons Thrive plan, is our ecology as a community should be, really carefully considered in relation to any future development and such that, so that would be one of the major things that I think I found consensus in conversation with people in my community outside of the confluence and in the confluence. So there's one thing, there's many others, but there's one.
I read yours, Doug. I thought it was wonderful. I kind of dispute whether 150 to 300 houses is necessary. And the dog park can't be built on because of the conservation easement. So your overall things you like, I'm all for it. Homework done.
Okay.
And so
That's great.
this is why it relates back to document. So that's perfect.
Yeah.
When I've read the notes, I think everybody had something like that in their document. And so when we were doing the edits, one of the very first sections, which is on the screen right now, if I could get rid of the picture that's overlaying it. Let's see, there it is. Is right here, number C, and we actually added, this is a recommendation, this is not written in stone, but this talks about the development plan that recognizes both the urbanization potential of certain lands in the county near Lyons and the rural character adjacent of the adjacent lands, on and on, down towards the bottom, that preserve the unique and individual character, which is words that specifically are in the old IGA. It's throughout the comprehensive plan, and it's exactly what you said. Character of the rural quality of those lands, right? So, perfect. We got that one covered, and I think everybody.
Sorry,
Yeah.
but that was the one I took out because I objected to urbanization, and in its place, I put one from the original IGA, from the 2012. I mean, it's the same kind of idea, but it's a lot kinder and gentler to the landscape and the character.
Can you share it?
Yeah,
Well,
I'm
that's- did you have-
I'm working
have-
on.
Let's hold on yours and let's finish Charles, and then we'll come back, because we're gonna cover the same things like that.
Yeah.
Charles, what are your?
So I just thought like, and I saw this in a lot of people's, Doug, it was the first document that you prepared in this IG task force, which was, there were 3 really beautiful sentences in the original IGA that speak directly to this, and they're in the Thrive Comprehensive Plan. Planning for and regulating land use in order to minimize negative impacts on surrounding areas and protect the environment was one of the original pieces of language. The second is parties' intent is to preserve the rural quality of the land, which is captured there.
Yep.
And then to preserve Lyon's unique and individual character through the orderly development, which is also captured there. So the only thing I'm not seeing in that draft that you wrote is the plan for and regulate land use in order to minimize negative impacts on surrounding areas and to protect the environment. I think protect the environment is one critical
Right here.
phrase that, and you've got that on the.
Section 8, in order to minimize the negative impacts on the surrounding area.
And protect the environment. Beautiful.
So what we
Does
did,
everybody agree there? Is there a consensus on around this table that this is like a rudder for this, recommendation? I mean, that's what I feel.
both of those.
Recognizing urbanization.
Urbanization, yeah,
And protecting the environment.
finding that beautiful middle path balance.
Sweet spot in there.
But Martin, you
Yeah,
find,
I'm gonna
find
find it,
agreement on that? Yeah.
So just to go back to the purpose of an IGA, Boulder County, going back to the first document, it's about not being a bedroom community.
Right.
AKA urbanization does matter,
Right.
right?
Right.
And what you're saying makes perfect sense. I think we all would agree on.
Yeah.
But the details are what we don't agree on. We don't build on the detail. Right? So that's where we get back to.
You can't do it,
Sorry,
they probably.
But I mean, when you're talking about negative impacts to other neighborhoods, it's pretty huge, right? With any of these, we're gonna build a road that 200 people drive down, wherever that ends up, right?
So that's just one of the ideas. There's also, of course, the critical point of a sustainable economy and a sustainable community. That's another critical
Yeah.
point that I think we're all gonna find a
That was
consensus.
on,
and disagreement.
it was on everybody's document.
Yeah.
That I saw.
So finding that and then finding agreement and disagreement there. And then the other point was really okay, yeah, hazard and unnecessary risk. That was another critical point that, I think we all have strong opinions on. So, if any of these are in conflict with there being hazard, fire, flood, whatever, or risk,
It's the whole area.
which could be the whole area, certainly, but there are places that have less, right? It's a spectrum. Then that's something that needs to be considered. So, I think that we all would have probably an opinion on that. And there might be some consensus around that as well. Like if, there is an area that has hazard or risk that's obvious and common sense, it probably shouldn't be something that we develop into because otherwise that'd be foolhardy, right? So I think we could probably find consensus around that topic.
And so
And-
this
oh,
line was added.
Yep.
And it's down towards the bottom, the top of page 2. And again, we don't have to agree every word for the moment, but I think this is helpful, I think, to get these key points and go, are they addressed in here? How do we start to get to them? But this, of many things that talks about residential development, it says emphasize proactive planning for the future needs of the community while balancing the demands of environment and economic sustainability with the community character, wildlife, ecological preservation, historic preservation, and property owners' rights. So that kind of captured a lot of that wording is from the old document, but it put it in a section that kind of makes sense with
How to compare these to Cindy.
well, we'll come back to Cindy's because she has some good words too, and she had a lot in hers. So I think let's go around.
We're just kind of like collecting topics, I feel
Topics.
like right now.
Yeah.
So like the topics, if someone wants to write, the topics, right, that we've identified so far are ecology and environmental protection / preservation. The like urbanization / supporting the actual economic engine of our community is another critical theme topic that we need to, find consensus and disagreement on and make solutions based upon. And then risk and hazard, to the community is a third. I think the last, but certainly not in order, thing that I have on mine, which I wanted to just make sure that we do address, which is it's sort of related to the economic engine, which is meaningful impact on the town's housing and attainable housing goals, so that rental prices are maintained and or decreased, and housing prices are affordably stabilized, right? So that I'd say that's one other maybe critical theme that we all have an opinion on that our recommendations could make a meaningful impact on.
Yeah.
So
And
there's 4 topics.
and it's the wording has been moved in here, but I think it's worth pointing out because I think your last point is really good. If you remember from Mayor Rogan's comments last week, one of the words that she used that I thought was really important was housing affordability, which is broader than affordable housing.
Just with a capital
Right.
A.
And there's things that we can do to make all housing options more affordable for individuals while working on specific affordable housing or attainable housing goals.
Right.
And I think that is in here in that comment about housing affordability being a driving consideration is in here for sure.
And just to further define that really quick, like you've really been talking about affordable housing with a capital A with density and AMI and all this stuff, but really like it's broader than that. Like when there's more housing, when there's more inventory available, rent and housing prices stabilize and decrease. So it's just a really simple supply and demand metric. Like if we have this much housing right now and the prices are this much, when you add more housing, the prices either stay where they are because it's competition for buyers or they go down. It's the same thing with rentals. So instead of talking about affordable housing and AMI and density, like talking about increasing housing stock generally to meet the demands, the intentional demands of the community will therefore stabilize or potentially decrease both sale prices and rental levels. So, I think that capturing that idea as opposed to just being affordable housing with the capital A is really going to be critical.
Does affordable housing meter always run off what the numbers in for the county, or does it go by the actual city?
Well, this is an important distinction because what I'm saying is that it's broader than those metrics that are established for average median income and density. We're talking about affordable housing as like, is housing just generally, this is what Mayor Rogan said the other day. We want to be affordable to folks at all levels of the economic cycle. And right now it's becoming unaffordable to people that make even a lot of money, right?
Well, because we're in Boulder County,
Right.
In Boulder County.
Yeah.
You can almost like place, almost like in Los Angeles County. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but Boulder County has got numbers that are a little different than everybody else around us. And so our numbers have a tendency, we're kind of a little bit high, we're
Right.
kind of high.
Yeah.
Because of what we have around us, because of the neighborhoods we have.
Yeah.
So that puts Longmont, where we used to think Longmont, you could go live and it's real affordable.
Yeah.
Years ago, 20 years ago, when certain people I know that came in 20 years ago,
Yeah.
Lyons was real affordable.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people came up from Boulder
Right.
to live in Lyons, Jamestown, Ward, Netherlands.
Yeah.
Because in Longmont, because it was like real affordable.
Right.
Now, the way Hygiene, Niwot, Gumbel, Louisville, Superior, and even in Boulder have made numbers go up, then it caused these other numbers to go up, so that even lines go up. So now what we call affordable housing kind of got jacked, almost didn't work, but it got jacked up. So you go and you say affordable housing, and now you got the townhomes where I live, and it's called affordable housing. And I go, whoa, this is affordable housing. It's up there. The numbers are up there.
Yeah.
And especially now you gotta put the utilities on top of it. It's pretty high. Okay, so now you feel like, okay, I'm on the square, live in Boulder. Maybe that's what the numbers are. So now so it jacked up numbers even along. Okay? So it makes it quite difficult. The place that I just moved out of in Longmont, which was supposed to be affordable housing, they just went into foreclosure last year. Okay, now they're in big ones.
So we're not gonna solve
I know,
Boulder County income problems,
I-
but let's work on, I get what you're saying, but
but
let's come back to the IGA document.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying, and we've talked about, so Jen,
And
that's,
that economic principle, build more and prices will stabilize, has been disproven for a century now,
Especially in this area.
right? So
I don't
it's
know,
a nice thought to have, but we see how it hasn't worked.
but I mean, I don't know, that's the business that I'm in, and I know that basic
Well,
supply
okay.
demand.
That's what I'm saying.
time out, I need a bell or hammer or something.
Get back on the
So-
agenda.
We went through your
Yeah.
things, I think we captured those points, but it's
Yeah.
very good. Jen, we'll just go around the room. Yours were a little harder for me to decipher how to incorporate, but maybe we could just talk through your key principles. And I think what we do is we go through this, I know Cindy has a lot,
So that way someone else can-
and then we'll take all those notes and we'll try to make sure they're either worked into the document or they're worked into a set of recommendation, and maybe that becomes the basis of our next discussion, but that feels.
I do, I mean, can we pause before we go to Jen,
Yeah,
just to see,
please.
because basically, Charlie, I heard 4 things that we are trying to identify as potential areas of general agreement, even if we don't agree on
Exactly.
the hows, but the whats.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and I just want to get a sense of whether there is actually agreement, because I think one of them maybe not, but.
Okay, yeah.
So the importance of preserving ecology and the rural nature of Lyons, but also recognizing there is some urbanization potential.
Yeah.
Do we all generally agree with that? And this is not a vote, so
Yeah.
this is just kind of, okay. So, just, a sustainable year-round economy, however we all want to have a sustainable year-round economy. Yes, probably.
Yes.
Okay, we all want to account for and address hazards and unnecessary risks, whether that is now or in the annexation process, whatever, but we all think that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
Correct.
And then making some impact on housing availability and affordability.
Yeah.
Whatever that is, and that's the one that I feel, I mean, I know that's something I'm into, but maybe that's not as general an area of agreement. Do people think making an impact on housing availability and affordability as a general goal is something that we agree on for the IGA? Yay or nay? Just
How
general.
many kind
Given
of,
it's in the right spot.
Okay,
Yeah,
so general.
in the
so
right
We're
spot.
talking like
Yeah,
high
people-
level, can we agree
So
on
that's-
anything?
want
that's
Okay.
spot.
As long as
Is that
done
Four
right.
right?
things that
4 or
we
5
kind of
points?
agree on at a high level, so hot damn.
That's,
Wow.
that's good progress. right
Wow. Look at that.
That's good progress.
So even if we can't all agree on exactly how to do these things, if nothing else, we can say to the board of trustees, we all
These are
agree that
guiding
these are
principles.
things that we think should guide what we're doing here. And then maybe on some of them, we'll actually agree on how.
Yeah.
But, okay, so that's nothing formally voted on, but just making sure I've captured that. So I think we can go on.
As long as we don't get too far into the weeds.
It'll take 5 seconds. It's called an ends and means analysis. So y'all are providing the ends, the kind of the overarching goals, and then you'll provide, your means, how you're gonna get there, but you'll have, it sounds like you will have, alternatives within that. So,
On some of them.
Yeah, maybe we have consensus on some of those needs as well.
Mhm.
I think that's a good idea. Good.
Perfect, thank you, Julie.
So,
Jen, you want to take a stab at some of your big bucket items, or?
Yeah, I guess. So going back to the original document and actually going back to whoever made the statement, and it could have been Victoria, about they got formal, maybe it was informal at one of these meetings that I didn't go to. Feedback from people saying that they were going to vote to get rid of the IGA if it was published like this. Didn't someone say that? So did anyone get more details from those people about what they didn't like? I think I know, because I talked to some.
You mean of the draft IGA?
Yeah,
I think there's a lot of things people would like.
yeah. So I think things that the people I talked to want to see added back, because it was actually fairly well written in this one from 2012, was keeping this history in here. No, it's not actionable, but even I worked in a highly regulated industry, and we kept history in our documents, even if it was a table at the end that said what changed and why with the date in big terms, right? People move to Lions and they don't know anything, right? And then they say, why did you do that? Well, this could help with some of that. These folks moving in.
So which is like specific, just so I
Well,
can
there's a bunch
capture.
of recitals in the whereas, and I didn't retype the document. I
No,
just
that's okay.
took the PDF and made it a Word document, and then I just kind of flagged a few things.
I numbered them going down because they were numbered, but the third, I see your
Yeah,
highlight
well, I
page, it's the
can,
fourth one.
I could send you some of this, but yes, the things that were removed. And, you know, I would say the one good thing about the new document that the old document doesn't have it are these definitions. People would love to see more of those definitions put in there. The purpose and intent, same thing, right? Maybe not actionable, but very necessary, and actually describes things you were just all talking
It
about.
makes it
This
feel
would be
much
the
more
purpose.
comfortable to put purpose and intent back in.
Right,
It should be the first step.
right,
I mean,
Yeah,
it's warm
exactly.
and fuzzy,
Maybe
and
that's what
just
we
like we
call-
thought Lions was
Right.
in there.
And then, you know, it talks about the map and the designations, and I think that's where the definitions also are gonna be really important for these other people that are not in this room. This is a little teeny group. This is a small study talking about what to do with the future of Lions. There's been a lot of public comment. Larry Quinn provided some on Facebook. Robert Breckenridge, really, really good stuff about,
And it's in your packet. so that
yeah,
his
and
letter.
what matters, you know, with these risks. So one of the risks is where you can get water and sewer. Big risk. The land outside of the planning area. So I guess when we talk about map, that's where it gets messy, right? Why some things are in the area and some aren't, and what are the primary planning areas? What's the definition of that? The old document also talked about utilities and permits, and why doesn't the new one, I guess, that's just a question. Because it kind of made sense. Utilities and permits, which is a big piece of the annexation.
section
I don't
is
think you should just refer to, oh, there's a process. I think people actually do need to know.
I agree
A
with you, but I
little
got
more.
tired of typing where I would.
I actually don't, well, I should have not.
And I also didn't know how it might have changed on the specifics of those things, so I didn't type it.
And then we have talked many meetings about zoning changes in zoning. And I know there's only a couple sentences in here, but I think we need to either add it back to a definition or explain it when you're talking to the map. And the new document doesn't really, it calls out parcels, which I would say get rid of all of that. Or have a, I don't know, a different way to talk to specific parcels. You're not going to speak to all the parcels. A lot of data about why Apple Valley hasn't gone faster, right? And that data is not captured in here.
So I've captured those bullet points, but maybe, and I've captured yours already, Jen, so yours are, and I think Julie captured, summarized them pretty well. Jen, maybe the best thing is if you can send like the specifics, that's kind of was the note I said back. Then we'll address whether or not they're in here or can be in here, or back to the point that Julie raised earlier. Some of this, if it's too aspirational, I don't know if that's the right word or not. Maybe it belongs more in a recommendation to the board specifically, as opposed to in addition to the document. And I think those are the two buckets that we should look for. I think anything that somebody comes up with, if it doesn't belong in the document, let's at least capture it as a potential area of recommendation and discussion for the board. So when
I think there will be some of those.
I think there'll be
You'll
quite
get
a
them
few.
from your public comments also.
Yeah. So is that cool with everybody? If you send me your notes, I'll try to figure out where they fit in, and we'll figure out which of those buckets they fit in, and the next time we go. And we can flag them all by different people. Does that feel comfortable?
Yep.
Sonny, do you want us to come back to you?
Yeah, once you go ahead.
Cindy, do you want to try to take a shot at the big bucket? Like, I started
I
going through
can't
yours,
big
but
bucket because I did the assignment as an editing process, kind of like Jen did. What she said, I thought was great. One of the things she wanted to mention before, but I didn't think it would go anywhere, which was if we could just say why things changed, then everybody has to spend their whole summer or life trying to trace down by reading the first report in 19 whenever about how this came about and why in the world is the line there and why did they change this property from rural. It's so much work for so many individuals, whereas yes, I realize the document will be longer, but it could at least at the pitchfork meeting people would have been why did they change it? What does it come down to? Instead of all of the effort to try and track it down.
well, then I think we're going to get there. I mean, I'm more optimistic now than I was a few days ago that we can get there. And I think there are a lot of why questions, some of which we'll be able to address in the document. A lot of them we're going to have to address to the board. And so let me explain a great example. So a great example is on the map. This comes back to the map, which has the most why question. So there's the parcel 346 Steamboat Valley Road, which is the parcel to the east of the Carpenter property.
We're talking about, I have a whole document on that one.
So
too.
let me just explain to the rest of the group. So that property has nothing to do with the Carpenter property. Nobody's ever talked to that property owner. The property went from rural preservation to developable to not to be developed. Why? There's no reason for that parcel to be on the map.
With that one, it might have to clarify that how the IGA was drafted is it's annexable.
It's not. It's a flat piece of property. It's the flattest, most developable parcel in the entire map.
That's where the teleportation is.
They want it for utilities, and so they made it so this poor sucker who owns it can't develop it if he wanted to, if he wanted it annexed in. It's almost like the first step to, what do you call that when you condemn somebody's property for what they want it for? It took me forever to figure out what was going with that property, because it's sitting right next to the Carpenter property. And it looks like one of those carve-outs. Here's a Carpenter property, and here's the Walters property. This one's all lined out, and this one they have is developable. They're not owned by the same people.
I think one has a conservation easement.
Well, right now, it's got a bullseye for being not, yeah, it is, and it's next door to it. So worse yet, there's a conservation easement on the property next to it, and we want to take it from rural preservation to basically developable so that the city can put utilities on it. I just feel like that's outrageous.
So that's a why that we will specifically ask the board to address.
Yes.
As opposed to
Or a
this.
theme that has that.
Well, I think there'll be specifics. And when Julie and I were talking about some of this yesterday, we realized there's going to be some specific questions like that. And so what we need to do is, instead of arguing about them today, is say, this is a specific question, we need to make sure it gets specifically asked. If we don't start moving towards specifics on the document and on the recommendations, we're not gonna make it out of here in 3 weeks.
Well, here's the bucket. The bucket is like, there's a bunch of kind of anomaly like things that have happened between the drafts. We gotta capture those. You know, I don't know how many there are, but this one has come up several times. We capture those anomaly things that we're trying to get transparency into. It's almost like a why/transparency bucket. That's like the theme.
Well,
And
I
then if
think-
we can bring those into it, then the board can then address them in a transparent
Well,
manner.
beyond
Taking out
address
of
them,
executive
if I understood Jen right, she wants them in the document. You want a tracing, right, of
No,
what's
so,
changing?
well, that was one of my earlier questions. Why in the new document are you listing out exact addresses when in the old document, you only listed out things that were covered under a different IGA?
not
Lee
true.
Cronin
The whole
or,
document had specific requirements related to a variety of persons.
did it? I thought it only had that, Lee Cronin and the CMAX
For
property
no
were called
development
out.
areas were identified, so. it's not accurate.
Even the Redstone Lodge had previous restrictions as well.
Getting specific again
And
here.
we're- yeah,
We're getting
I don't
way
know what that
specific
has to do
again.
with anything. Yeah.
Like, why don't we keep it at the theme bucket?
So
level?
Jen, was
That's a
there
good
any
theme
more
bucket.
of the themes that we didn't cover? And I think we were then back to Cindy. And Cindy, if it's too hard to go through, I can
It's
finish the
just
comparison.
pointless to go through. I
Okay.
sent it to you. If anyone wants to look at it, they're free to look at it. It was much like Jen's.
Yes.
The first document has some really great things that I think most citizens would say was in the character of what they thought Lions was. And it's been stripped out. Yes, it's shorter and it's easier to read, but it takes sort of the idea of what people wanted their community to be like, and it just removes it. So it's a free for all as they move forward. It feels like a free for all.
Why don't we do this? Because I couldn't go through all of them. They came in Sunday nights. I started yours, but I didn't finish incorporating yours. Well, why don't, if you guys are comfortable with it, I'll take that one. Jen will send me hers and then we can incorporate those. I think I know what the big buckets are. Cindy, I know yours, a lot of yours are already incorporated because yours was similar to mine, but I'll finish going through yours. And we'll make sure it's either captured in the document as a suggestion, or it's captured in the broader recommendations. And then we can all have a discussion on that.
Seriously, it sounds like if you include Jen's and his language about wanting the community to be the way it is, I'm covered with that part, not the specifics of the property.
Yeah,
I'm covered.
It comes back to what Julie said, she already identified the 4 items, and I think you're gonna find, I found when I did the quick read, that the things that were being captured were very similar.
Well, in fact, the first thing I did was highlight the exact things essentially in these. You would not believe how similar these are. They just took the warm and fuzzy, this is Lions, out of this and stuck in, this is exactly what happens to those properties. That's the difference, because I really couldn't tell until I started typing and trying to see where it was, what it was.
Bring the one that tells you that.
Bring the one with us.
So continuing round table, do you have any specifics? And your notes were more, bigger bucket, I think. So it
Yeah, I
wasn't-
mean, no, you saw my big bucket thing. That was my,
Can you say them?
It came in
it
late,
was
so they
very.
probably didn't.
Oh, I read this,
specific
yeah,
to
but maybe-
Property, it was,
Yeah.
came in late, because I had tech issues.
Yeah, no worries.
all weekend, but this was done last week before the meeting, so. My point is that these are the big bucket things that I have looked at. Again, I feel like the annexation process of everything we just identified, the ecology, the risk and hazard, the economic impact on housing, that, all those things are already going to be looked at in the annexation process. To put them in the IGA seems a little bit redundant, but I'm willing to do that just so we can get somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, because it's always better to have more eyes on it, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. It brings accountability kind of. To
Yes.
follow those things.
Yes, and historically, we haven't had an awesome relationship with Boulder County. In a long time ago.
Mhm.
We were struggling with Boulder County. Now it's getting a little better, and I think that's why this IGA came into existence to begin with. Because they had different ideas than what we did about what needed to happen here. However, at this point, because there's been so much established already, that I don't know how important it is to put, whatever, we can just, I'm happy to put that stuff in there to move forward. Mine is very specific to the properties, big bucket stuff to properties. We need to look at the whole town as a whole. It's a giant picture. The details and specifics that I have, I can share the next agenda item. There's details. I think we need rezoning things. I think we need some things put in on the map, taken off, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's read my. It's an easy reading document.
I've got a question. Sorry.
No, that's
I
good.
agree with, I thank you for what you shared, and concessions you're willing to make on it. And one question is it possible, so there's obviously like, let's say 4 or 5 things that we all have kind of agreed on are really critical. Is it possible to have in this document, or would this need to float above it, a little tool that is like annexation light that any person that's on the board could utilize to quickly understand if this is a suitable parcel for one specific parcel or something that comes up in the future that they could utilize, or if they're expected, it's obligatory that they utilize it in quickly assessing if a parcel is annexable or not. Like if we were to say, okay, ecology is defined as this, hazard is defined as this, economic sustainability is defined as this, affordability as this, like you must utilize this quick, or not necessarily quick, but this intentional little rubric or tool with which to determine if a parcel is appropriate for annexation or not. So that way it just saves the need to go through the whole annexation process. Can that not sit inside on top of the tool?
Not usually, I mean, if it were that easy.
If it were that easy.
Then we wouldn't be here.
You'd be able to wiggle your nose and make it up.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's challenging,
Yeah.
let's take fire road access, right? Some of these places, the current situation might be, folks are concerned about adding development because the roads there aren't always great.
That's what I wanted to do.
Right, the reality of it is, new development can actually help solve current problems. So you don't know, like you have to look at what's actually being proposed in this scheme of its location. You can't presume that, oh, fire access up here right now is really terrible.
So it's
Well,
always.
no development ever in the future is ever going to be allowed.
So it's a way to,
That's why I said not mitigating.
So- so then is the best way to then make that, if a recommendation for a process cannot live on that legal document, we can make a recommendation for said process to the Board of Trustees to build out so that it's something that's.
Well, you have a whole.
Yeah,
set.
exactly.
We have it.
We have an annexation process.
Right, I get that,
I
but
don't
like,
think we
also
can-
there's all the costs of it.
I know, but that's
But
part,
that's
that's
there.
built into it, and
Yeah.
so if someone is actually moving, so this gets back to my whole, oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, it's not my turn.
That's finished.
Yeah.
That's finished
Sorry,
with Cindy.
so I didn't mean to
Wendy.
sidetrack this, but I
So
just.
just real quick, Cindy, because I have yours up on the screen.
Wendy.
Wendy, sorry.
It shouldn't have
Cindy,
lines.
Cindy, Wendy's right next to each other. We need to separate it. I keep looking one way and saying another.
I mean,
You have some notes on the counter property.
Yeah.
But I don't understand. It says specifically for utility and secondary evacuation routes in case of fire. Is that?
I'm saying that could potentially be a use for that property. All these are potential uses for the property, right? Because we don't know what the buyer or the property owner is gonna wanna do with that property. So,
So that's what you're trying to outline. It's the specifics of the properties on the map in your document.
yeah, I mean.
So you
the
guys all
potential
got
for
that
these
late
properties
last
are
night or maybe this morning. So, okay, perfect. Julie, do you want to, you've already captured yours in the document, but do you want to add anything else right now or?
Okay, so just to quickly go back to what you were saying, I mean, that speaks to my entire philosophy about the map is, and in complete agreement with Wendy, there is a very robust annexation process that is burdensome and expensive. And if someone is even going to bother, when they really think they have an idea that's gonna get through it, and I don't want to take properties off the map because I think today it doesn't look like it's doable. When in 8 years, someone might put together a lovely plan that addresses the risks, that addresses the utilities, that everything that we've talked about is already built into the process. And so that's my whole philosophy of this. Because of that, I don't think it's useful to put the annexation process in the IGA. That is an absurd amount of, that's just too much. Refer to it. You can make references to outside processes in the document. It becomes part of the document. We are saying we are committed to following the annexation process as outlined by the town of Lyons and whatever. I mean, we can refer really specifically, but good God.
Yeah.
We don't need to, and the same thing, I know I get the warm and fuzzy stuff, but the reason that stuff was taken out, my guess is for cleaner drafting. Shit that is, stuff that isn't enforceable or actionable. Good contracts don't have that.
Right.
Good contracts only have stuff that is enforceable, boring, and that actually is an actionable, enforceable thing. The warm fuzzy stuff is neat and fun and everything. It's actually not meaningful except to make people feel warm and fuzzy. And this isn't about making people feel warm and fuzzy. I'm sorry, it's just not. It's about planning the future for the next 10 years of what we might consider potentially annexing if the incredible barriers we have created to that process and continue to create to that process are overcome. I think the process is good enough. And then back to my big bucket, my overarching, the only reason I am here is housing. And I know that's not what the IGA is about. But when I talk to people in Old North who don't live on the edge of town and who don't have anything to lose in terms of their view or their property value, or we're on the edge. The people in the middle of town are on the edge, okay? Barely hanging around. No place else to go if their properties get sold out from market. No other options for a single bedroom affordable house of any housing of any kind. Even the people who live in the nice houses, we're living paycheck to paycheck, y'all. So the needs that I'm trying to address and the voices I'm trying to speak to and the people I have spoken to and gotten surveys from and met with have a very different set of concerns that I am here to try to voice. And I absolutely agree that we have to look at all the other stuff. But and I actually made a lot of compromises in what I sent in my edits. I did not do what I wanted, okay? I took out all the affordable housing requirements and just referenced general goals, trying to make it more malleable and more of a dynamic living document. So I'm willing to concede some of this stuff, and that's why I'm here. So
it's not easy to go. This is almost like an NFL draft.
it is impossible. It is impossibly hard, and what we are experiencing here is a microcosm of exactly what's going on out there. There are very different interests. There are very different populations in this town that are a world apart from each other, literally. And so I am here to keep speaking up for the people who don't have time to come to these meetings, who don't have time to look at Lions open discussion, the toilet that is, that don't have time to attend board of trustees meetings, that don't have time to, they don't even know what this is. All they know is another guy in a white shirt showed up at our property and they're probably gonna buy it and I'm not gonna have it. So my purpose is more important than the what. The reason I'm here matters more than what happens, and that's all that's the beginning of it.
And
When
you
it's
go.
sort of a question or on that. It's about saying the annexation process is so robust. And I'm kind of new to this, but like I looked at the TiVo documents that are out so far for his property. It's like, well, I'm gonna build something and it's gonna be commercial on the front. And I think now that I've heard this, I can have residential in the back. It doesn't feel very robust to me. That I want to trust it. I've looked at everything I can find, and it's not feeling very robust for that. And it's the Eastern Corridor, I get it, but still, we want to trust this process that's so ironclad.
Maybe that's a theme. Maybe that's a theme that we like look at ensure that the annexation process is, I mean, I've never looked at it, so, except I heard the primer on it, it was like 18 steps.
And yet
18
it's
applications.
fundamental to it.
So if we're gonna
Yeah,
trust
okay,
it,
but
then
We have to trust in our government.
But
And
I
the
started
board
not feeling
trustees.
very trustworthy
That-
lately.
And that
after
is
what
the
I
problem
have
that we
seen.
can't solve. So we're not gonna be able to say, we're not gonna be able to instill trust in the government in this task force. And so I guess that's a fundamental question for each of
it's a
us.
theme.
Do we trust the process or not? And if we don't, that's fine. And that's, you will give voice to that, and that's gonna be the perspective you're coming from. Others of us do and choose to, and those are both viable, reasonable options.
And
So I'm not saying mine is the right.
In the minute, in just the interest of time when she's finished.
I'm just saying that's where I'm coming from. I'm just trying to explain the whys of what the changes that I've made. So
So-
that's it.
What we're going to end up with, and I think the only way this is gonna happen is if you guys feed me your stuff. We try to incorporate it into one of these two buckets, either the recommendations to the board as a starting point, as a draft, or if it makes sense in this document. I agree with a lot of what Julie said in terms of what the document is. I'd like some of this reference to history in there, but to a point. I think it has to be some guiding principles that we need to put a box around and give the board of trustees some guardrails, if you will. And I think a lot of that can be used with our recommendations there. I mean, they're ultimately gonna have to make the decisions, so. Did you have a question,
I
Jen?
just had a question because you made me think of something, and I don't know how successful it is because it's a newer idea. But the ski towns are doing it. They're putting words in that aren't must or shall necessarily, more shoulds. Which is a good definition of the document. You do that. Tori. About if you're gonna build a business that's gonna have 50 employees to 100 employees, then part of your plan has to be to create housing for those employees on this property or whatever. That's something that anyone's ever thought of, if it would be possible, but
It's,
the hotel downtown would be a good example.
This or town code, like,
it's certainly possible. There's-
yeah, they have to make some.
So we just have about 12 minutes left. Do you guys feel like you can, I already have yours. I just haven't had a chance to incorporate it yet.
I just want to say the bucket, to me, sounds like we need to understand that the annexation process does in fact capture the needs of the town. Otherwise, we can't, sounds like that's the trustable process,
I mean,
right?
we already had a presentation about the
Right, right.
process. I think
And to
that
me, I'm
if
like,
we
okay,
give a
it seems-
recommendation to the town, or if we
Yeah.
say something to the town about this, it is, there's a general sense of mistrust of the government in town and in the United States right now.
Yeah, right. Totally.
On the planet.
It's also important to note that it's not just annexation, you know, there's
Zoning.
several, that you have annexation, zoning,
County.
subdivision, development plan, there are a multitude of steps. For some reason, we just seem to be getting held up on
Yeah.
just this one process.
And we didn't get to hear from Martin. I didn't mean to skip you, Martin. It just, we came around and I forgot.
Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody that actually wrote stuff up. I did a lot of rumination on it, had some deadlines that were pending over the weekend, but
We're all
all the hard work is very much appreciated. And I feel like the thing that we've come to today is how specific to go versus broad. I believe that Charlie's point, the consensus that I see are that we really need to be broad in scope when we put any language in there regarding affordable housing. Needs to be just meeting county parameters.
In the document itself,
Yes.
but not necessarily, we can be as specific as we want in our recommendations.
Right, just broad scope, broad language on that. That infill is important, but we also have to realize that those are private property owners and they can do whatever they want with their property, which can be frustrating. And then all the other things, as far as the big one with the map, in my mind, I just, after a lot of thought about it, I just felt that we can't take legally person's property owner's rights away from at least trying. I mean, if they want to go through the headaches, all the hoops that Andrew's mentioned, Anna's mentioned a number of times, who's us, you know, to stop them from at least trying. So I've come around to kind of saying that can't really just really, really remove anybody that's ownership rights, whether it's financially feasible, legally permissible, that's not possible. And those are my two big takeaways. I'd be willing to try to gather all our consensus points, see if I can, I guess, conceptualize all those. The one thing I will finish with is that when I spoke to Mayor Rogan last week, and she couldn't explain why the drafts are so radically different because it was an executive session, I think that speaks to one of our big stumbling blocks. And it's come up a couple times, and the transparency of why those changed. Maybe it's in our purview or not, but I think Julie mentioned some of it recently, like maybe we could try to explain, good contract versus bad contract, and sort of, like a Supreme Court, right? When they come out with their decisions, they have to have reasons and drafts behind them. Maybe there's something along that.
And again, remember, we're gonna have basically three buckets. We're gonna have a bucket of recommendations for the board that are gonna be either specific or general. And it's a wide range. That's kind of what I was trying to capture. It can be anything. We're gonna have specific recommendations, specific wording on the document itself. And we're gonna have what's gonna amount to two separate sets of recommendations on the map itself. One is to leave it the way it is, one is to look at it in a different way. And so as you go forward over the next couple of days, think about those buckets and we'll figure out where some of it goes. Some of it does go in the document, but some of it's going to be more important, more meaningful to be a recommendation for the board. And again, my hope is to create sort of some guidelines that we as a collective group, as a community group, want to put on the board. It's a public thing, so everybody's going to know what recommendations, and the public can decide how tightly to hold the board accountable, on following whatever our recommendations are. If they're meaningful and logical, I think people would hold the board accountable for it. If they're fluff and they're like, yeah, it sounds good, but what do you want me to do? Then they're not going to be held very accountable. So that's kind of, I think, how we need to look at it if we can going forward. Any other comments or thoughts on that, Wendy?
I would just like to say something about the board being held accountable and there seems like there's like this mistrust or distrust in the board of trustees. And everybody got to vote for their board of trustees, and whoever didn't, if there were, anybody can run for one. It's a volunteer position. There's no pay. It's like, a lot of freaking work, a lot of reading, a lot of research. And I just want to point that out that, if you want to talk to a board member about something, they're always willing to talk. They're always willing to have a conversation. And I feel like we need to give them a little more credit than what we're giving them.
And I totally agree with that. I talk to David all the time and tell him, thank him every chance I get. I think what it comes down.
It's a thankless job. That's the problem.
What it comes down
After last night, taking all the arrows.
Yeah.
You took a couple.
Oh, yeah, I've been
Can I
through
just-
it.
I would add too, if you don't trust the annexation process and want to dive in and improve it, there's two openings on the TCDC, so jump right in.
There you go.
I'd like to thank you for standing up to the Pretzels Mouse last night. You're the only one who did, and I thought that was great. And we didn't have an open to talk, so I really thank you for that.
But to Wendy's point, well made, Wendy, but I think what the challenge with remember, this is an IGA task force, not an infill, not a board, not an annexation. This is an IGA task. We're looking at the IGA and making recommendations. The concern, and Martin said it here, was because there's a vacuum of knowledge of what went into it. And when you look at some of the differences, you can't find data that explains it. And so the only thing we have to do is say, we don't know, so therefore we want you to consider this going forward. Maybe they have. and there was some logic. We don't have the privilege of that. So when I talk about accountability, it's not like David's a bad person, he needs to be held accountable. It's, we don't know what went into this. We can't figure it out.
Yeah.
The staff told us in specific terms what they did and didn't look at when they chose properties. We don't know what the board discussed or didn't discuss, and therefore we're gonna put together a plan that says, when you go forward, because we have these questions, these are the things we'd like you to take into consideration. I don't think we can do any more or less than that.
Right, but there is institutional knowledge that occurs. And just because you haven't been a community member or in the mix of working in the public with decisions like this, doesn't mean that there isn't that knowledge. I get
We
that
just can't
what
figure
you're
it out.
saying.
People can't figure it out. They don't
They just won't
understand.
tell
That
us.
They don't know, we don't understand it. It's incongruent.
I mean, it's, if I may, I think you're, I don't know, seeking something more complicated than it actually is.
I would agree
The
with
town
that.
boundaries are what they are. There's a certain number of properties that have contiguity. Those are the ones where the town could annex in the future. It's really just not, I don't think it's more complicated than that.
I think it got complicated when they added
This specific.
all these different specifics and put all these densities on each specific.
And when it
I think that
all,
was a shock to the system.
That's
and when
what.
it changed from rural preservation
Yeah.
to something so very different than rural preservation
Yeah.
with no explanation.
But if you read the draft, a lot of that's been taken out of it. That's why the draft that Julie put together was really, it's not the final, but it's a really important starting place. And so I certainly would encourage everybody to look at that again. Again, give me the notes. I'll work with Martin and maybe we can put this together. If we can get it together in time, we have a little extra time because our next meeting is Thursday, not Tuesday, and it's at 11 a.m. instead of 12. So
48 luxurious
48
extra hours.
luxurious hours.
Indulge.
But I think we can get there. I appreciate your point. It is the complexity of what's in the document, and it's the unknown of how it got there that I think that's what created this task force. That's why we have a task force. If everybody knew what was going on, then we wouldn't have a task force. So with that, I don't know if we have a summary of.
The only action item I think we have at this point is that Martin agreed to try to help conceptualize the agreement, the things we have agreement on, and I can help with that as well, because I've got some of that listed out, but I don't know that, I mean, other than everyone.
And Jen's gonna send her specifics to Martin. I know people. I think she can do that. I think she can send it to both of us. And I'll finish going through Cindy's. And
Maybe
she's gotta send it to me.
Yeah.
I got an action we can all do. I think this would help us because we'll have a basic primer of what everybody hears. Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Let's go on.
Oh, just maybe in the next 7 days or whatever it is, we all like carefully look through each other's notes and edits. And that way we just have a
Read all the
better
minutes.
understanding. Read it all, read the minutes. That way, when we come into the next conversation, we really feel like we're on the same page. Not necessarily on the same page, but we have all the information in our brains. I don't know. That's what I will do.
Any other topics that anybody wants to cover?
I got one random thing. I'm not really sure how it fits in, maybe with Martin's last comment, which was about the idea of rights of landowners. A couple of the folks that I talked to in the conference were really concerned about, and Mary Rogan mentioned this the other day, how the state of Colorado is exerting its influence in different ways on rural and municipal communities. And we want to ensure like some members of the community in Confluence want to ensure that, and maybe this can be put in the IGA, maybe not, I don't know where exactly it goes, I just want to voice it, that we kind of know maybe better than what the state necessarily wants to exert, because we understand the character of our community more than maybe folks sitting under a rotunda in Denver. And, we chill out in the creek, and that cools down our brains a little bit. And so we can think a little more clearly about what makes sense. And so I don't know where that sits or where that goes, but I did agree with that. I'm like, yeah, really we should be the rudders for the development of Lions. And maybe that's just maybe it's a misperception about what the state has interest in.
No, I mean, that's absolutely
What
true.
Rogan
Mayor
said.
Rogan is working really hard. She is there every single time that
Right.
stuff comes up. She is testifying. She's part of all of these orders. So if that is a comment, that is absolutely something I assume the whole board of trustees wants to retain local control.
So can that be a
not-
theme?
Well, I
Yeah,
mean, I think it already
It
is.
I
was-
think it's above our
It's
heads,
above,
but-
it's
Yeah.
above our heads, but it is already a theme, so.
it's a
It
theme,
is
so
very
maybe we
much
can,
a-
maybe we can comment on it or recommend on it above the
We
IGA
can
or
just
above
say
the
that
thing.
we agree with
Yeah.
that, just to give them, just to say, yay, board, we think you're
Yeah.
right.
Well, and march down to the Capitol when these.
Hell yes,
Right.
we can absolutely
I'll
testify
examine it
remotely.
for 8 hours.
You don't even
anytime
have to
later.
march down to the Capitol, folks. You
Or
can
just
sign
write
up, you
letters.
can register and you can testify by Zoom for anything in the state. It's fine.
So.
On that note, any final comments or anybody want to make a motion to adjourn?
I thought this was a great productive meeting, I just wanna say.
I just want to say that I think, having read all this stuff pretty carefully, I think we are getting close.
Yeah.
We're getting somewhere.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's nice hearing everybody's thoughts and opinions and felt like there was more respect and listening. I thought that was great.
Very good. Thanks. Anybody else? Motion, anybody?
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
So moved.
All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you, all those online.
Is it raining out there?
It rained yesterday.
So.
Yeah.
What I've got, and then we get some stuff from Jane.
Well,
Now I gotta
I
go
mean,
to
I
the
might be able to
library.
zoom in on.
I see you're here,
Yeah.